Welcome to the Open Apple podcast, where we celebrate the Apple II. Whether you're a long-time user, a nostalgic visitor, or a newcomer to the community, join us as we share news and memories of Steve Wozniak's most famous personal computer.
Hello and welcome to Open Apple. This is episode 56 for February 2016. I am your co-host, the first, Quinn Dunkey. And with me as always is co-host, the second, Mike McGinnis. How you doing, Mike?
That's me. How are you, Quinn?
I'm good. I've had a very retro-filled couple of weeks since we last recorded. So
tell me about
it's been good. Well, let's see. I was up in the Bay Area recently. There's a koala sanctuary up there that I wanted to go see. And while I was in the area, I thought, well, there's a computer history museum or something here, right? So I went and saw that. And
how was it?
I would describe it as neat, but also weird.
Okay. Why
they
weird?
I'll start with the neat. They have a lot of really cool hardware there. A lot of stuff that, you'll never see anywhere else. There's pieces of ENIAC and UNIVAC and, magnetic drum memory and just other crazy contraptions that you sort of only heard of. But then it's also weird because when you start to get into the sort of post-60s, late 70s stuff, the collection gets pretty spotty. For example, they have a couple of Apple IIs, but neither of them are Rev Zeros, which seems like an oversight. In fact, both of them just look like pretty run-of-the-mill kind of late-run IIs. They have some other, another groups of 8-bits as well, but they have, strange gaps. There's a lot of, popular models that they don't have for some reason, and they have a little game console section, but again, significant models that aren't there. So it's there's sort of weird gaps in the collection, but it was pretty cool to see. They have a really, really beautiful PAT 2001 there. If you want to see what one of those looks like brand new, they have one. They have an Apple I, of course. Probably the most expensive thing in the building based on recent auctions. So, and the layout is very confusing. Actually, it's a bit like an IKEA. Like, it's this sort of rat maze, and you're not sure if you've missed stuff or something. But
oh, goodness. Okay.
Yeah, but no, I definitely recommend it. It was a good time.
Great.
What about you? Have you been up to anything?
Well, I've actually been up to watching you kind of go viral. I see your name all over the place now.
Yeah, I went viral and it was weird. Strangest thing. So listeners might know I also have a blog where I post about Apple II stuff and various hacking projects. And, last month we talked about how I had dug out my floppy disk collection from Mom's basement and was going through it. And, I'd cleaned up an old laser 128 floppy drive and I just, part of the blog post, there was a video of me booting Gemstone Warrior, an old favorite of mine, and happened to be the first disk on the pile, so I booted that up. And for some reason, TechCrunch picked up that article, and they posted it, and then my world blew up after that. The sort of 48 hours after that is sort of a blur, but the video, which, by the way, was filmed shaky cam, holding it in my hand on an iPhone 5 with a shattered lens, so it's all fuzzy and weird. It was just a throwaway, never intended to be anything. The video went from 60 views to 160,000 in about 5 hours.
Awesome.
And and the TechCrunch synopsis of my blog post was basically entirely wrong, which was pretty amusing. They clearly didn't really read it. They just kind of skimmed it. They talked about how this was the first time in 20 years I had turned on my Apple II GS, and just like every detail of the story was wrong. And then of course all these other tech blogs pick that up and they just, they copy and paste each other's, synopses and change a few words here and there. So that just the whole thing just spiraled out of control. And then it started trending on Facebook, and then all my friends noticed. And then, I got some viral video company started contacting me. They were super pushy. I got about 100 messages from them through Twitter, email, Facebook, YouTube comments, blog comments, it was a very strange experience. I joke that every single app on my phone had red numbers on it for various reasons. So, and then after a couple of days, the internet blinked and I was no longer a thing, and that was it. So, and I didn't make a dime off of it as far as I know, but it was an interesting experience nonetheless.
Yeah, I knew it. I knew something was going on when my non-Apple II friends were sending me links to your blog and to the video that you posted. So
Yeah, I first heard of it because my coworkers were sending me screenshots of the Facebook trending box, and I was like, what's going on? My brain can't process this. And then I found out the hard way that YouTube will send you a push notification every single time someone comments on one of your videos, and that I didn't know it did that because I've never really had that happen. And so I was getting spammed like push notifications from YouTube for 2 days straight, and because there was something like 1,000 comments on the video in a couple of days, and I could not figure out how to shut them off. So my phone was just blowing up for 2 days.
wow.
However, one very excellent thing happened as a result of this. Of course, the video of Gemstone Warrior was what went the most viral. You know, the blog post went a little bit, but mostly people shared the video. And a fellow by the name of Peter Lount, I hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, happened to see it, and he commented on the blog post. And he is, of course, is one of the authors of Gemstone Warrior, and was hopefully thrilled to see his fine work show up once again on the internet. And he joins us here today.
Hi, I'm Burger Becky. If you have an Apple II, you've probably played one of my games. You should listen to the Open Apple podcast.
Say hello, Peter.
Hi, Quinn. And Mike. Quinn and Mike. Yeah, hi.
Yes.
It's Lount. It's Lount, like in count.
Ah, okay, Lount. Peter Lount. All right. So, welcome to the show. And
thank you.
Yeah, we're glad to have you here to talk about Gemstone Warrior and the sequel.
It was sure fun seeing it blow up there and, go viral. And after, 32 years?
So, what was your first reaction when you saw that video and you're like, hey, I know that?
Hey, that's cool. I thought it was awesome. Interesting talking with fans after all these years.
Did you sort of know there was still an Apple II kind of community out here, or was it news to you as well?
Yeah, I've known there's an active Apple II. I've of course looked into various simulators and actually a couple years ago now I was studying field programmable gate array chips, and there's an Apple II for that. So I was actually getting into the 6502 from the other side, the inside to Silicon. So Gemstone Warrior, of course, was written entirely in assembly language.
Very cool. So why don't you talk about the sort of the genesis of the game? You know, how did it come about, and how did you guys get started on it? There was you and one other person working on it. Is that right?
Yeah, Trouba Gosson. And he was a friend. I knew his mother. I worked with her, and we became friends. We were both fans of Dungeons and Dragons. Although, surprisingly, we never played D&D together, but we were fans of it. One day I asked him if he'd like to make a commercially successful video game in the fall of '82, and he said yeah. So that was the genesis of it. And we started having ideas and long discussions. Often we go for long walks and talk about it. And if you know Vancouver at all, there's an island called Granville Island. We'd go and get sandwich material and sit on the grass in the sun and talk about the game and what it was going to do and how it was going to be an adventure game, but also an arcade game. So we fused the two styles of play, which had never been put together as far as we knew. And we were inspired by games like the early Castle Wolfenstein and Lode Runner.
Of course. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think Gemstone Warrior is fairly unique in that it's sort of arguably, the predecessor to things like Diablo. I mean, it's that sort of action-adventure roguelike. Had you played other roguelikes, like procedurally generated types of games, or was there inspiration there as well?
Those I found kind of boring. I, of course, played a lot of different games. I'd gotten the Apple II in 1980. When I was working at a computer store selling them right out of high school. But I'd played with it before in '79 a little bit. But different games, there was a couple text-based games, adventure games, but that didn't really interest me. I'm more visual. So we came up with the idea of doing it as an adventure game and figured out ways to do the graphics system. That was the first part of it. And that took 4 rewrites to get speedy and fast enough to really make the game interesting, because we had to move a lot of graphics around to have that adventure feel, because we were both big on the coin-op games in the at the arcades.
Yeah, I think the game really stands out in that way. It's very visually impressive. Big colorful graphics, and I think it's it's a beautiful game to look at. Do you remember the details of the graphics engine, and can you talk a little bit about how it worked?
Oh yeah. At first I implemented it, and we wanted the vertical and horizontal scrolling, of course, which you can see in the video. At first I was moving 2 pixels at a time, which was incredibly slow, because it had to move 8K of data, 2 pixels, which meant manipulating bits within bytes. And then I finally figured out the layout of the screen to some degree, and instead of moving bits, I started moving bytes, and that was the 4th version of it. And so if you look at it carefully, it's actually moving 2 bytes at a time when you scroll horizontally, and when you scroll vertically, that's a bit different. I actually had to slow down the horizontal scrolling I had to rewrite the loops so it'd be more like the vertical scrolling, because there's no interrupt timers on the Apple II. So I had to balance the horizontal scrolling, which was way faster than the vertical, because it was 40 bytes wide, and you basically move it. You move 1 step to the right, so that's moving 38 bytes over, and then filling in the new column. So the vertical, I had to rewrite the horizontal one to match the speed of the vertical. And then that was about 6 months work, 4 iterations, 4 different approaches. And then we honed in on that, and now we had the size of the graphic blocks. So Trouba could do a lot of the graphics then. So he did all the artwork, and I did all the programming, and we did the design equally together.
So how did you get hooked up with SSI to get the game distributed?
Yes. That was a long road. It took us 1.5 years of development before we even approached anybody. And then there was a company in Vancouver where Trouba's stepfather was working, called Sydney Developments. They actually published the game Evolution with Don Matrix, who eventually became the head of Electronic Arts. Don and Jeff Sember and Don Matrix wrote this game Evolution, and they blew up in the television media at the time, so they were, the big stars. And so we were working with Sydney, and they were in negotiations with Strategic Simulations, and it's just the contract was really bad, so Sydney Developments let us out of the contract, and we went direct with Strategic Simulations. So it was an interesting twist there.
And then from there, you from Gemstone Warrior, you also then developed Gemstone Healer as the sequel to this. Is that right?
Yes, we did develop Gemstone Healer. Also, we hired a guy named Kevin Pickell, who did the Commodore 64 and Atari 800 ports of Gemstone Warrior and Gemstone Healer. And he later went on to work at EA and work on their 3D engines, a lot of them, 3 or 4 of them.
And if you remember, what innovations or advances were there from Warrior to Healer?
There wasn't that much technological difference. It was a different story. Oh yeah, the one difference was the huge big breakthrough was in map generation. I devised an algorithm similar to the Game of Life, where it would generate the dungeons. And so if you start up Gemstone Healer, you type in a 12-character passcode. And whenever you type in the same passcode, it generates the same dungeon out of trillions of possibilities. And it does so using 2 algorithms. One connects the rooms together, and then the other one fills the rooms while making sure there's a 100% guarantee that the algorithm provides to allow for a pathway to go from any number of doors. You could have 1, 2, 3, or 4 doors, and I had to guarantee a pathway. I wrote an algorithm to do that, and I got it wrong. So we had a deadline.
Of course.
Yeah, of course I have a deadline, and I got the algorithm wrong. I made the wrong choice. I should have chose the 0 approach instead of the 1 approach. So in 22 hours, I had to rewrite this massive amount of assembly language code, and it was nonstop. I shut the door, and everyone else was partying, and because we were near the release, and so it was a frantic time, but I got it working, and so we then shipped that one, and then later we did a port to the Macintosh of Gemstone Warrior. So
how did you get started on the Apple II then?
Well, when I was a teenager in Edmonton, the TRS-80 came out, so I was interested in microcomputers because my dad was into computers before I was born. He was an early adopter in civil engineering back in 1955. I would also work at his engineering office on their 32-bit. What was it? It was Interdata 732 mini computer. I did the nightly backups and stuff like that. Just high school kid jobs, putting tapes on the reel and backing it up and stuff like that. And I would play around with it. That's where I started programming BASIC, is on that mini computer. And then I got an account at the University of Alberta because I'd bicycle across Edmonton, down the river valley and up again. I'd bicycle over blueprints or do pickup runs because they worked a lot with professors at the university and used the equipment there as well. So I kind of got into computing that way, and then the Apple II came out, and when I moved from Edmonton to Vancouver, as soon as I graduated from high school, I started working at a store called CompuShop on Georgia Avenue near the Bayshore Hotel. So I purchased an Apple II pretty quickly, within a month or so, under an employee plan they had.
Did you remember what it was about the Apple II that appealed to you over the other machines available at the time?
It was just friendly, and it wasn't like that pet you mentioned earlier with the tiny calculator keypad, which I first started using inside at a Hudson Bay calculator booth. Hudson Bay's a department store in Canada, and they had it at the calculator, glass showcase. And it was like, what the heck is this with a weird keyboard? Because I was already used to terminals with proper keyboards, right? Basically, I'm like kids today. I had early, introduction to computers through this. There was always a tape terminal at home as well. So the yellow tape, a teletype terminal at like 110 baud that my dad would use on a Saturday afternoon so he could be at home with the kids. And then, I don't know, I just liked the 6502. It seemed like a simple processor, and I picked up there was a green manual. I can't remember who published it. And I wore that out. I mean, I still have it, and it's like really worn. I must have read it 100 times. And I was just totally into assembly language. I still, I see license plates with BNE on them. That's branch not equal. And I'm like,
yep.
I'm still seeing, 6502. And then, like I said earlier, I actually, someone cut one open, and then they photographed. I can't remember the details, but there's a website where they actually show you the inner workings of a 6502. So about 2 years ago, I studied that for a month and actually comprehend how it works inside now.
Yeah.
And there was a couple instructions that would have been useful.
Yeah.
That I didn't know about. So
there's a cool site. I think it's called the Visual 6502 or something. Might be what you're thinking of. It's actually, they've actually simulated it at the PN junction level, so you can actually run code on
20,000. Yeah, something like 20,000 transistors, and I was at the same time I've been studying field programmable gate arrays to put some compression algorithms into chips, so they're right next to the camera sensor chip for higher compression ratios, and that's why I got into that, because it's interesting. To a low-level hardware hacker or designer. Sorry, I'm not a hacker. I'm a designer. I design things. I know the difference between hacking. I prefer when I can actually design, because then you get it the way you actually want it. Which was what we did with Gemstone Warrior. Like, we were comparing other games when we designed it. Like Castle Wolfenstein, you run around and you get shot and it takes 2 minutes to start a new game, or you bump into a wall and the screen goes and just flashes for, I don't know if you remember that, but
Oh yeah.
yeah, and you're frozen for like what, 5-10 seconds? It's like, what's the point? So we wrote down a list of everything we liked about Castle Wolfenstein and everything we absolutely were going to do away with or fix. So how did I, the same, like the graphic system that took 4 times to get speedy enough, the same thing happened with the disk system. And it was 4 iterations. I came up with a 5th one, but we didn't ship with that. We didn't need it. We had met our target. And there was this article in Byte magazine that talked about the human response time to noticing a delay on a computer is about 1/3 of a second, 300 milliseconds. So we decided that our room changing had to be close to that. So it was, you hardly noticed it. And then the starting of a new game had to be almost instantaneous, because, we want to be playing, not waiting 2 minutes. And what Wolfenstein had done is they were rewriting all the rooms. Whenever you died, they would go and reinitialize the game and write the disk, but they were using Apple DOS 3.3's disk writing code, which was terrible. So the various versions of the disk system in Gemstone Warrior I kept shedding layers of Apple DOS until I got to the very core, which was just the 4K read and write a disk sector routine. So that's the only Apple code that's in our game. So when you boot up the Gemstone disk, the only code remaining from Apple is that 4 or so K of code. That's the disk read write sector routine. That's it. So really, Gemstone's its own OS. And the only other piece of code that I got from someone was the sound system from Jeff Sember. And I really do appreciate that from him. There's a video I made recently putting the recording a YouTube video of Gemstone Warrior through the new Roland System 1M modular or semi-modular synthesizer, and it sounds amazing. It's just incredible. It's out there on Mount Thor on YouTube. So the sound was really great, but again, the problem was there was no interrupts. So, as the game loop is proceeding at about 9 frames a second, there's a balance between the sound that's playing. I can't take up too much time. So that's kind of sort of set the nature of the sound, the audio experience for the player. And then there's the scrolling. So that took time, and we had to balance the vertical and horizontal so it would take an equal amount of time in each direction. Because again, no interrupts. And then we had to do what's called, I invented a algorithm for artificial intelligence, so the monsters were smarter than they were in other games. That was another thing on our list, that the monsters could go around corners. They didn't just plot a straight line to you and bump into the wall constantly, So in almost, not all cases, but about 90% of cases, the monsters go right around the islands in the dungeon or around corners to get you. And
I hated that feature.
Well, I made that feature just for you, Mike.
Of course you did.
And then all the monsters were all different. We did a lot of design work and thought about making each one unique and different characteristics. So the skeletons are different than the hydrogen balls, which blow up. Although they were sort of only close proximity. They wouldn't care about you unless you're within like 3 or 4 spaces. Whereas all the other monsters, as soon as they saw you, they would come after you.
Yeah, one of the things that I really liked about both of those games was how deep the story felt. I mean, even though you were playing an arcade game as opposed to Ultima, which was more of an RPG, there was still a lot of depth to it.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, we put a lot of effort into that. We even coined a term which is reality resolution. So we pushed the reality resolution as far as we could. That's how many details. It's like pixel resolution. You get bigger and better screens, and now the Retina screens on the little on the Apple devices. And so that's what we were doing. We were increasing the resolution as much as we could, given the hardware and the time it took to program it.
I like that reality resolution.
Yeah. So it was pretty cool. And with the map was actually pretty chunky because it was really it wasn't even the full width of the screen, which was 40 bytes. That's 20 squares. I think it was 11 by 11 grid, and you moved in it always in the center, and the map moved around you. We showed it at a conference at Robson Square, an old computer show, and this guy walks up, and it happened to be Stephen Wozniak. And he was like, his like wonder in his eyes, and he's like, looks at me, and he goes, "You wrote this?" And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "Oh, how did you do that? How do you make it go so fast?" So he was asking me. I shouldn't have told him because he seemed a bit disappointed when I revealed the actual truth of it, which I've told you here about the block architecture, moving 2 bytes at a time, and Trouba had done all the fractal look to it. So in the second game, the actual room, the blocks were automatically placed. So there was, and it figured out which block needed to be there to give the jagged edges to make it artistic. Yeah, it was a neat meeting. That was pretty nice. And there's another part of the story there. It's like years later, after Gemstone Warrior, it ceased to sell and everything, and I was on a vacation with the family over in Ontario on an island that a friend owned, and I wake up in the middle of the night, and I scribble down 13 assembly language instructions, and I go back to sleep. So it turns out 6 months earlier, I had read an article that described the exact layout in excruciating detail of the Apple II 8K memory map. There's 2 of them, so 2 screens, and it used buffer flipping. So you're always changing the screen 2 when screen 1 is being displayed, and vice versa. So it's double buffering, and so you make your changes in the screen that isn't being displayed, and then you poke a location, you write to a memory location, and boom, the hardware switches which screen's being displayed. So that's how it got the smooth animation. But this article described in excruciating detail how the screen was laid out. So those 13 instructions I wrote in my half sleep, that made the graphics twice as fast. Because I could do the math for moving the blocks around. I could do the math with 8-bit address calculations instead of 16-bit. And on an Apple II with 1 megahertz clock rate, you're getting anywhere from 250 to 300, maybe 400,000, depending on the instructions. 250 to 300,000 instructions a second. So that's really your clock timing. And for example, that music code that's in the game is specifically written to be based on the timing of the instructions to give it the correct frequency output through the speaker, which you could just push on or off. So it's a 1-bit digital to analog converter, 1 bit, not like the 24-bit recording, that we make today. Or this described the layout, and it turned out that you could just add the index for the next row of pixels, and that was just an 8-bit number. And it worked out. I could rearrange it a little bit, and boom, I got a graphics code twice as fast. And I did start using that in another follow-up game, but that never went anywhere. The Apple II's era was gone.
So it sounds like obviously this was it's a big project. Had you done anything before this, or did you just kind of dive in and say, this is what we're going to do?
I had written, I'd been studying since 1980, I'd been studying assembly language on the 6502. So, and this was October of 1982. So I'd had a couple years of practical study, and I was writing assembly language code and collecting it from FTP sites off the file transfer protocol sites off the internet, bulletin boards and stuff like that. I was collecting assembly language code, source code, and modifying it. And so I knew how to use all the tools, and well, we just dove in. Our goal was to create a commercially successful video game that was in the arcade action, what do we call it? We call it Adventurecade trademark. That's our genre that we did, and actually at the 1985 CES show we won an award for the best new arcade adventure game. We define the category. It's great that people call Diablo a sort of a follow-on style of game. I always thought so too myself. It'd be interesting to talk to them, whoever wrote that, and ask them if they had played Gemstone Warrior or not.
Yeah. So this was literally the first game you'd ever written then?
Yes.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, we were dedicated to quality. Quality was our commitment. But I look at the game now, I play it, and I say, oh, I found a bug. Oh. A visual glitch. Sometimes the explosions don't quite map. They had a masking operation to not go over top of the walls, but in a couple cases they do. But no one except me would ever notice that. Oh, except I just told everybody.
Well, we won't tell anyone.
Okay, good. That's great. If it's just between the three of us.
Nobody listens to this anyway.
Did you also compose the music and the sound effects? Because that was a big part of the game for me was hearing the great sound that went along with the graphics.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, there's the introduction sound as you're walking into the dungeon. And that, I think, is actually a piece of classical music, actually. Someone recently told me what it was about a year ago, and I just, sorry, I can't remember at the moment. So that was, I think, a piece of classical, and then, which it works perfect for arcade games, surprisingly. It's quite nice, and it sounds beautiful on the recording I did with the new Roland synthesizer. But then the game sounds, we had to come up, that was all trial and error. Because we didn't have much time, right? So it's a loop, 9 or 10 frames a second. So, you only have, let's say just for round numbers, it's 10. That's only about 100 milliseconds per frame. We had to move the frame. We had to do the monster intelligence. We had to do for all the monsters, there was up to 9 monsters in a room. And it was an incremental monster intelligence. I had studied the logo language, and it had algorithms for going around things, but that wouldn't work because you have to run that algorithm fully, and that took too much time. So I had to come up with incremental movement. So it would actually, it would kind of guess a spot, and it would head towards that. And if the guess was not better than each turn, it would recalculate the guess point. And part of the record of the monster was to store the X and Y coordinate that it was heading to. And then of course, it knew where you were. So the sounds where we had to pick, and that was just trial and error.
Well, I'd say the whole thing was very successful then.
Yeah, there was about 500,000 users. Not sales, but users. So it was, or maybe it was sales and then there's two. I can't remember. It was actually quite successful. And for many months, it actually carried strategic simulations, paid all the staff, everything. So.
Yeah, I was one of those that, I don't know if this is good to admit or not, but I had a pirated copy, and the way the Apple II thing worked with those games that you didn't necessarily get from a legitimate source, where you just boot it up and start pressing keys to see what happened. And there was so much going on in the game that I couldn't figure it out, so I went out and bought a copy.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm glad we put in a lot. I'll have to tell Trouba that. That caused you to go buy it. That's great. Yeah. Yep. Well, that's the whole thing that shook up the music industry is the same thing. Often people hear it first through a download or a friend giving it to them, and then later they decide to support the artist.
Well, I wish I could say that my motives were that pure, but I just wanted to be able to play it, and I couldn't figure it out.
Well, years later, I actually was doing consulting with a company in Vancouver, and I'm big into the Smalltalk language, and so that's what I learned after assembly language was Smalltalk. I kind of bypassed C. I actually learned C after learning Smalltalk. So. But anyway, I was consulting with this company, teaching their people Smalltalk, and one of the guys, the owners of the company, turned out to have not only cracked Gemstone Warrior on the Commodore 64, no, I think it was the Apple II version, but he published how to do it in Hardcore Apple Hacker magazine or something.
Computist, yeah.
Yeah, he actually published how. So, and there he is interviewing me for a job, and he looks at the resume and goes, "Oh, you wrote Gemstone Warrior. I hacked it." And I'm like, "Oh no." Actually, we turned out to be good friends.
Well, I guess good for him for admitting it.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm afraid I can't claim to have a legitimate copy of it because my pirated copy is now on viral video for the world to see. Clearly.
Yeah. That actually, official version boots up. It goes from Apple II at the top to Gemstone Warrior. So there's no other intermediate graphics or text. That's how you know it's an original. Yeah, it turned out the copy protection was used. And it had 1 byte. You change 1 byte and it deactivated it. I mean, it wasn't the strongest thing in the universe. And it was I think December 27th or 28th. It was just about to go of 1984. It was just about to go to publication, and I had a bug I had to fix while I was in Toronto on vacation. I literally just changed a byte on the disk, and then that master disk was FedEx to them. Or I told them which byte to change, I can't remember, something like that. And then it went to press, and they started pumping out copies. The artwork was done by somebody an artist they hired, the standard artist they had. I guess he'd done a lot of their box covers. Trouba's sister, Kaylee, had helped with the writing of the story. So there's this movie, The Fifth Element, that deals with the 5 things, the fire, water, air, and earth. And the 5th element, of course, in Gemstone Warrior is the warrior, right? Just like in the movie. So I don't know. I think we're owed some royalties or something.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear they stole your idea.
Yeah, so it's not just Diablo it's also that awesome movie.
Although you probably would have had a lot more sales if you'd figured out how to put Mila Jovovich into your game.
Yes, I think so. Yes.
It worked for Resident Evil anyway.
And if we had gone onto the PC platform, which was a big mistake business-wise.
So you did the 2 Gemstone games on the Apple II, and then you went ahead and moved forward to the PC. What happened there?
No, we moved to the Macintosh.
Oh, right. Okay.
And that was a business mistake. I mean, the sales weren't that great, and technically it was a massive effort to rewrite all the assembly language code. And I had to do that alone, so it was really nothing for Trouba to do, so he went on to other things. So that's kind of where things were left, and I've tried to get him interested in a third one, or a new series with similar ideas, but no, not yet. I do have some ideas, though.
Do like a Kickstarter for the 3rd title in the series like they did with Wasteland?
Oh, that's an idea. I hadn't thought of that, yeah.
Or you could do an iOS reboot like IO Silver has done, or DinoEggs has also done that.
Yeah, I was actually looking to partner up with someone to do that a couple of years ago, but now that there's the whole Kickstarter thing, puts a new angle on it. It was really interesting experience doing it because we were so committed to quality and providing a reality that had some depth and that was fun and that had the elements of Dungeons and Dragons as well as arcade games and that had a fast pace to it, like Lode Runner or Castle Wolfenstein or any of the shoot 'em up games at the arcades, like Pac-Man or whatever. But we wanted to have a reality that gave people an experience.
So what did you go on to do after Gemstone Warrior or Gemstone Healer?
I was, like I said, I was working on another game by myself, and I went on to learn Smalltalk, which one of my mentors in computer science, he got a copy of Smalltalk, and just right after Gemstone was published in 1985. So I got a Macintosh Plus and was running Smalltalk on that, the original Xerox Park Place Smalltalk. So that took a while to learn, and then I worked at a startup that was doing a clone of Smalltalk. And unfortunately, they picked Gem instead of Windows. This was all pre-Microsoft Windows. And then I went on. I've done a lot of consulting. I worked on Wall Street for J.P. Morgan Consulting, and got to work with one of the people who had invented Smalltalk, one of the 5 people, Diana Mary Shapiro. And I learned a lot because I could ask questions. And I go, why did you guys design it this way? And she'd wheel her chair over and give me a 2-hour history lesson on the design. Subsequently, I worked a little bit with Alan Kay when I was redesigning Smalltalk and producing a language I call Zoku Talk. And he was gracious enough to have a 3-month-long email conversation with me just about every day, where we looked at the language and what it could do, how it was designed, and how, what if it changed this or that. And so I've designed that. I'm actually still working on getting that implemented. It deals with parallel programming. I have a way to do safe parallel programming. What the Apple II really taught me was, and the approach I used with it was a very scientific, method-based approach to optimization, getting stuff to run fast and to meet the targets we had, like the third of a second to change rooms. And the end product, it was a quarter second to half a second. So a third of a second was right in the middle of that. And most of them were closer to a third than half a second. There's just some big rooms. So I really learned a lot about optimization and programming. A lot of programmers these days, you even suggest assembly language to them and they run the other way.
Yeah, memory and CPU are free nowadays.
That's the sort of the idea, but then you get all these, games. You get the screen flicker problem, the synchronization, and you get an API like DirectX that's, built on 4 other layers, and you get all these slowdowns. I recently worked at a company managing a team and developing a really amazing 4K video player. And again, it was all the same optimization skills came back into play. And chasing down, why is that slow? Oh, this API has too many layers. We need a lower API to get the performance. And or we rewrite stuff for the GPU, parts of the compressor. And great, it works incredibly fast on the GPU, but because it's going through the PCIe bus, it's very slow. It's a huge amount of data. It can generate, boom, instantly, quick, like 200 times faster, but it takes about 200 times to move the data over the bus. So it was like, okay, until there's a faster bus, it's cheaper to do it on the CPU, speed-wise. But it's rare. I mean, one of the guys I hired was actually, for that project, was actually started around the Apple II era again, on the Apple II, and he had worked on a paid assembly language project every year till I came across him in 2010, and I hired him. So he had the skill set. He didn't know C very well. I didn't care. I mean, he was amazing at optimization, so we got along famously.
Yeah, a lot of those old 8-bit programmers have gone into embedded systems nowadays because those skills are still really valuable there, and there's still a lot of assembly language and microcontrollers and so on.
Yeah, and the optimization skills are a black art. Even my nephew Sam loved me shouting out to him. Anyway, even he is like C++, and I'm like, oh, come on, we can go faster than that. But often you don't need to, so that's fine. Like, it's actually wise. I learned the hard way with the Macintosh port. It turned out to run at 18 frames a second. It did have an interrupt timer. I had to slow it down to 9 frames a second to be playable. So, I mean, I should have written that really in C, and it would have just run fine. It'd probably run at 12 or something frames a second in C. And then I could have ported it to the PC. So, easy enough. I really should have done that. That was a business mistake. Partly strategic simulations, partly us just not understanding the market as well as we should have. My technical bias was, I didn't like the 8086 chip.
Sure.
So that was...
Who does?
Yeah, well, now I do. Now, actually, Intel's done it, and AMD have both shaped it and done amazing work. It has almost 1,200 instructions. It's basically, if you pick a subset of the instructions, it's actually a RISC processor. If you just leave the complex CISC instructions out of your code, boom, it's basically a RISC machine. And the 64-bit x86 is absolutely wonderful. And some of the extensions they have, we use them in the video stuff for MMX or XMM, and then they have YMM. We weren't really able to use much of the YMM because not all the CPUs have that yet. But those are like, you can do operations on 256 bits, and they're planning to extend that. They made space for it up to 1,024 bits. So, and you can byte that as single bytes or as 16-bit or 32 or 64-bit bytes. I think maybe even 128 chunks. I'm not sure about that. I have to double check that. But nowadays, I absolutely love it. So for the compiler for my new new system language, Zokutalk, it compiles to native code directly. And again, that's so the whole design skills I learned from programming on the Apple II come into play.
So do you remember what happened to your Apple II?
What happened to my Apple II? I know the one I have in storage is not the original one I had. We developed it on... Oh, I remember, yes. I actually sold my Apple II to my dad. And he added a Z80 card on it, add-on board that allowed him to use Fortran, which was his language in civil engineering. And then he sold it. But I have an Apple IIe in storage, along with, if you've ever heard of it, a wonderful chip product known as a zip chip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are sought after.
Yeah, we'll crank it up, install it, and crank it up to 10 megahertz, and you just can't play Gemstone Warrior. You walk into a room and the demon is already biting you, and it's like dead in seconds. It's hilarious. There is a Win95 emulator, Apple II sort of emulator that's the best one for Gemstone Warrior. But I can't seem to find it anymore. I don't know. So maybe the internet does forget.
Is it Apple Win?
Maybe.
I think that's a good PC one.
Yeah. So that works. So you can actually play the game if you can find a good emulator, and there's a number of pirated copies.
Yeah, it runs great in Virtual 2 on the Mac as well.
Oh, it does? Okay, great. I don't know if there's an Apple II emulator for an iPhone or iPad or something, or Android.
There are a couple for Android. For iOS, there aren't any kind of official ones, but there are some that you can use. There's, for example, there's an FTA Christmas demo package or an FTA demo package on iPad that actually has an Apple II emulator under the hood running it. And if you do some tricks with iTunes, you can get it to run other software as well. But officially, Apple doesn't let you put emulators on iPhones or iPads. I think, Mike, do you know, does the browser emulator, is it virtualapple.org, call Apple's in-browser emulator, does it have Gemstone Warrior?
I'm sure it does. They've got a pretty comprehensive suite of Apple II software available to play.
Oh, I guess that's if a browser emulator would work, then. But the trouble is getting the sound and the video emulated correctly. It has to emulate the hardware memory locations that did things like switched which screen was being displayed, and So I found about most of the emulators, half or most, just didn't play it well.
Yeah, the emulators have come a long way in the last few years, so maybe it's worth another look. I'm actually looking on Virtual Apple right now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I came across, because I studied how to do field programmable gate arrays, but it's a long learning curve to be an electrical engineer type. So I've been talking with other ones for a future project, and one of them was saying that he's done like 10 FPGA projects, so finished products that are stuff on space probes. He works for a branch of NASA. He said on one of the projects they got this library of stuff that transistor descriptions that were already in. So they just leveraged off someone's library, but he dug into it, and what he found was a 6502 processor inside this field programmable gate array library. So there he was, again, programming a 6502 that's in some space probe. Because part of the field programmable gate array, what those are is just a collection of transistors that are routable, where you specify the connections between the transistor units. Well, it's usually 15 or so transistors. They form a bundle that do certain logic functions. And then you have this whole wiring matrix where you hook up stuff. And then you can reprogram the chip in the field. That's why they call it field programmable transistor gate array. So it's just interesting that the 6502 continues to exist in undiscovered places. It really is a beautiful processor, and a lot of the ARM design is the 6502 design principles carried forward. You add 32 registers instead of just a few accumulator X, Y, and then the indexing type things. So you expand that out and you end up with the ARM processor, which is somewhat based on the 6502. And now is the largest. I mean, they ship billions and billions every year now. I think it might be up to 10 billion or something. You can just look it up.
Wow.
It's an enormous number of ARM processors that are shipped and made every year.
Yeah, it's funny. Everybody remembers the big processor war between Intel and Motorola and the others, but meanwhile, ARM actually quietly won.
Yeah. And then the OS war between Microsoft and Apple, and Apple won. Like every iPhone is actually a Next Step system.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Next Step won that one.
Yeah, Next won that, and no one even knows. And in '91, I got my first Next.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you did any Objective-C programming. It's got a lot of Smalltalk influences.
Yeah, I started studying C a few years before I got the Next, but I love Objective-C. It's based on Smalltalk, sort of loosely. And now they have Swift, their new version, which it really is a better language. Objective-C was nice. I did a lot of programming on the Next. Actually, at JP Morgan, I implemented drag and drop. So the Next base or Macintosh base, Mac OS 10 base drag and drop from here. You drag something, drop it there. That was my first assignment. I did that in under 2 months. And I implemented it in Smalltalk 80. It was fun having a Next on my desk. And I have like 10 of them in storage. And 2 of them on me. I have my iPhone in my one pocket, and in my other pocket I have my iPad mini. So I actually always carry a Next machine.
Well, I can confirm that Gemstone Warrior runs great in Virtual Apple on virtualapple.org. So I'll
great!
send you the link to that, and anytime you want to show it to someone, you can.
Yeah, thank you. So Virtual Apple on a website?
Yeah, I'll send you the link. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic! So yeah.
Yeah, and of course we'll have the link in our show notes for our listeners to try out as well.
I was just like, wow, it's trending on Facebook after. It was published in December 1984, the last few days of December 1984. So basically January 1st, 1985. So 31 years later, it was trending on Facebook. What?
Yeah, pretty remarkable.
Yeah, well, it's sort of the whole life cycle. There's so much amazing software that we've lost. And it's great to see the, software that was back then still being able to be used. But so much is lost. Like, there's a tremendous amount of software on the Next. When Next had the Motorola 68,000 or 68,020 processor, and then they moved to the Intel with OpenStep. They moved to Intel, PA RISC from HP, the Spark, Sun. They kept the Motorola, so they were on 4 processors. And there's just so much software that can only run on the Motorola version of the Next. That's gone. It's just beautiful software. So like the Apple II, there are people still using it. I have a colleague who has a PC-based Next that incredibly fast, a modern CPU, 5 gigahertz, running this old software, and it's just amazing to see it working still. So that is one advantage of going through all this old software, is to get ideas and implement features that were already done before, and to bring it, forward. Because people, there was this huge dumbing down of software at the beginning of the personal computer revolution, and I think it's gone too far. A lot of software from Microsoft and Apple is just dumbed down so far, there's no power in it. You can't access the power under the hood. But now that people, this whole new generations of kids, they live and breathe it. Even if they're a jock. Mm-hmm. Back in my day, a jock would never be caught dead touching a computer or a calculator. Now they're texting, and just like everyone else. So I think it's changed. I think there's an opportunity for people to make much more capable software. And games. The games are just so amazing these days. I can't even keep up with them.
Do you still have any of your old design documents or source code from the Gemstone games?
Oh, I do, yes. I have a box in storage that's filled with that. I had kept a backup copy with my mom in Toronto, and when she passed away, I was sent this. Actually, it was my nephew who brought it to town and gave this to me, and it's like a 1-inch thick printout of all the source code and the discs, the Apple II discs with all the source code, the development tools, just everything ready to go and make a new one.
Well, one of these days you need to dig that out and scan it so that and put it on the internet somewhere so we can all see it.
Yeah, it's that would be interesting to do. Well, I actually have the text files, so you don't have to scan the paper. Well, the design notes, sure, either photo or scan them, but the actual source code is in files. Yeah, I think I moved it to a Macintosh 20 years ago.
So we were talking a little bit about emulation and piracy and things like that, and
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we can't find the old authors of this old software anymore, or if we do, they don't respond to our requests. How do you feel about having your stuff out there, like the Gemstone games in particular, now available online? Is that something you're okay with? So, because some people don't actually still like that. So
I think it's great to have people playing it. The economic value of earning any money from it is long gone, and SSI doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, that's true. They went out of business, didn't they?
Yeah, so it's orphaned. So it's fine with me, but I'm not the only one who has a say in it. So
true.
Just the nature of copyright and all that. It's the whole piracy. Nowadays, the music industry is a good example. I suppose the game business too. Piracy was a big issue back then. We thought that piracy was advertising. It was part of the marketing, and that's basically what's happened to music. I'm actually in the middle of a music business course at the British Columbia Institute of Technology, and the whole new model that they teach musicians to further their career, as I've been getting into music in the last year, or to be a manager or a record label for other musicians, is to realize that people are gonna, like the Grateful Dead, there's copies of all the music, and you have to do other ways, not just the sales. I mean, you will make some money from sales of the originals, but you really have to consider it, the smart thing to do is consider it marketing. It's just part of the advertising budget.
Yeah, I remember the Apple II software development houses tended to go one of two ways. Either they went hard against the piracy and protected everything as hard as they could and were vehemently against it, or you had places like, Beagle Brothers who didn't even protect their stuff because they considered it advertising. So
Yeah, we did both. So, we did have copy protection, and that lasted a while. And the sales continued even after it was broken. But, you have to have good sales and distribution channels. But now everything is downloads, even major video games. So, a lot of it now with video games is you have the collaboration with other players, multiplayer, and you have the online experience. So piracy can really be solved that way, or you're really not caring if someone has a copy. You want a subscription from them, and you want them to, so you get more features if you pay, and etc.
sure.
So I mean, and there's many more sophisticated ways of doing a revenue that way I'm not even aware of, because I've been out of the game making business for a while.
The big takeaway for me here is that you're from Edmonton. I didn't know that. I'm from Calgary, so I think we're officially required to dislike each other.
Oh, okay. Well, that could be arranged. Actually, originally I'm from Toronto.
Oh well, I don't know. That might be worse. I don't know.
I did.
Carrington's from.
I did live in Toronto about 10 years and Edmonton about 10 years, and then I moved to Vancouver for my grade 12.
Well, nice to have another Canadian on the show. Anyway.
Yeah. I didn't realize you were Canadian.
With my sailor mouth, you'd never know it.
It was certainly a fun experience, and if anyone's making a game, the main thing is to dedicate to have a commitment to quality and a quality experience and a great reality resolution, whatever makes sense for that game. And it doesn't matter if it's 2D or 3D. I mean, just you apply those principles and you keep working at it till you have something. And don't let the business people steer you wrong if you're doing an independent thing. Do a license, don't do a sale.
Yeah, good advice. Good advice. Well, that's all the questions I had. Mike, anything else?
No, I think we pretty much covered everything. Peter, thank you for joining us on the show. This has definitely been an interesting talk, and of course, I was a fan of the game, so it's always great to get a chance to talk to their creator.
Yes, you gotta keep playing until you get up to the higher levels, and you too can be a demigod.
All right, Peter. Well, thank you very much.
Well, it's been great. Thank you for having me on your show. If you have follow-up questions from people, I'd certainly be willing to answer those.
All right. Well, thanks, Peter. That was fantastic. Well, Mike, we got a few news items here, so let's jump on into that. Give me a bumper.
Here you go.
It may be old, but there's still news. Apple II news.
Smooth.
I'm awesome.
We're professionals, folks. Top news item, of course, we would be remiss for not mentioning that KansasFest 2016 registration is now open. So run, don't walk to kansasfest.org to sign up. And if I was a professional, I would have the dates in front of me. Is it July, I want to say 17 to 22? Is that something like that?
Sounds right. Yeah, we'll call it that, and then just correct it in a later episode if we have to.
It's definitely in that area.
It's the 19th through the 24th.
Thank you. Gosh.
Yes.
Sorry, Andy. I promised we'd mention it on the show, and I choked. All right. We're on a tight ship here on Open Apple.
Yes, and Mike Harvey of Nibble Magazine will be the keynote this year, so that should be awesome.
Yes, definitely. Let's see. Okay, well, moving right along. One of the most common questions on the Apple II Facebook enthusiasts group is, how do I plug an LCD into my insert name of Apple II here? And the most common thing, of course, is the 2GS. Everybody wants to know, how do I plug a VGA monitor into my 2GS? And that question gets asked and answered about 1,000 times, but Here is yet a new way to do it, which I haven't really seen before. This is kind of an older link, and it's an older method that I think was popular kind of before, Nishida Radio and Ultimate Micro and so on had some of these video solutions that we could buy. So this is a way to do it with a particular type of TV that has a SCART connector on it for, which was more popular in Europe, but apparently you can get a SCART connector to connect to a 2GS fairly easily. And there is a particular type of TV that you could buy in the US that also has a SCART connector on it. And so there's a link here to those TVs, and you can still find them. They give you the specific model number of the TV, which is really helpful. So that means, you can set up an eBay watch for it and watch for one of those to come up. So there's some pictures on there, and the video quality looks great. So it's one more way to get an LCD or a modern monitor of some sort connected to your 2GS. So let's see, speaking of video for the Apple II, this is a very interesting thing. So I actually got led to this by the Floppy Days podcast, which is an excellent listen for anyone who wants more retro goodness. And Randy Kindig, who runs that show, was doing a multi-part series on the TI-99 4A. And I guess boo TI-99 4A. It doesn't have quite the same ring to it as Boo Atari, but
no,
really,
that's like, I don't know, that's like kicking a homeless person or something.
It really is. It's just mean to pick on the TI-99 4A.
It is, yeah.
Even the name is terrible. Come
it's
on,
had a hard life.
Yeah, that's right. There's like 4 punctuation marks in the name. Come on. Anyway, so Randy's doing this 3-part series on the TI-99 4A. And it has actually a really interesting graphics chip in it, one of the best ones of the era. And it's the predecessor to the Yamaha. I want to say it's the V9990, which was this kind of legendary graphics chip from the period, from the sort of the early 90s. And a very industrious TI-99 user has created a pin compatible, like a chip compatible version of that on an FPGA.
Wow.
That has a whole bunch of expanded capability. So it's 100% compatible with the graphics chip from the TI-99, which actually was used in a lot of different types of devices. It was used in a bunch of arcade games and a bunch of other types of computers and devices. And so he created this chip that it's 100% compatible and also has a whole bunch of new modes. And he sells this thing that you can buy that can be used on its own, like it's just a PCB that you can apply power to and some signals, and it will make sprites and crazy magic happen on VGA monitors. So someone on Atari Age has made an Apple II adapter for this thing. So obviously, there's no software for it. You'd have to write that, but and they're not quite available for sale yet, the adapter boards for the Apple II. But the F18A, which is the name of this chip FPGA thing, is available. So we'll link to all of this in the show notes. But if you're looking for a cool Apple II hacking project, this has got to be near the top of your list. So I bought one of these things, and I'll certainly buy one of these adapter cards once it's available and see if we can get the Apple II to make some amazing sprites and stuff.
Run, don't walk.
Yeah, it's a neat thing. I mean, this is definitely a hardcore project, but if you're into that stuff, like one of your co-hosts is, I recommend it.
I sort of am. I'm just not as good.
Yeah. So let's see, we got a note from Antoine Vigneault over at Brutal Deluxe that I'm Fed Up has been updated. Do you know about this, Mike?
I knew about the original version when it was released, but I didn't know about the update. So tell me about it.
Well, so yeah, I guess it's a preservation tool for EDD cards. Is that right? It does.
Yeah, I think so.
The EDD bit format and also nibble format copies of disks. And I guess this is one of, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the ways to sort of make clean copies of copy protected disks in some cases. In any case, the update now includes support for 800K 3.5-inch floppies. So courtesy of John Brooks of Rastad fame. So that's pretty exciting collaboration there. Let's see. Speaking of the folks in France, French Touch has been busy again. Is that right?
Yeah, they've released yet another demo. I guess they're on a crusade to prove that the Apple II does have a demo scene, and anemic as it might seem. But this one's called Crazy Cycles 2, and it's on YouTube, or you can just go over to a2central.com, and the link is embedded there, and you can watch it.
Next in the news, we've got Big Mess of Wires. Steve Chamberlain, I believe is his name. And he is the creator of the Floppy Emu, which is kind of the darling of the Apple II flash storage scene right now. He kind of came out of nowhere with this. Of course, as we've said many times, he's famous for having cornered the market on DB19 floppy disk connectors because they're also used by the early Macs for which his product was designed.
We love and hate him.
Yes, we love and hate him. But, he's also done a service to the community by adding software support for his flash drive to basically every type of machine that uses that connector. So, all the classic Macs, the Lisas, and now he's added Apple IIs. And he's recently added support for the 3.5-inch SmartPort drives. And very recently, this is sort of breaking news because I just got the email about this today, he's finished debugging the Apple IIc Plus SmartPort support. So there was something different about the IIc Plus. The timings on its SmartPort, I guess, were just very slightly different. And he said it exposed a minor bug in his code. So yeah, he fixed that. So the Model B will ship with full IIc Plus Smart Support as well. So we actually got one of these on the way, so we're going to give you a review of that here on the show very soon.
Yeah, so the Model B features improved protection circuitry and is compatible. This is from his website here. Directly compatible with the entire Apple II line, emulating a 5.25-inch disk, 3.5-inch disk, or SmartPort hard drive. While the Model A required a separate universal adapter for the best Apple II compatibility, the Model B has the equivalent functionality built in. The SD card slot is now a push-push micro SD, and it's now hot swappable. So that's pretty cool, I guess. And that's available for sale right now. And while supplies last, the old Model A versions are also available for a reduced price. I think it's only like $10 cheaper. So you might as well just buy the Model B.
Yeah, this is a great device, and it's got a really nice little screen on it too. It's nice to have a little display so you can choose your disk image. The UniS disk from Nishida Radio has one as well, but yeah, it's a nice feature.
Yeah.
It's interesting. We talked to Henry last month about kind of the lay of the land with these third-party hardware hobbyist devices, and he was saying how he likes to collaborate with all the other makers so that they're not all competing for the same 300 board sales in each particular niche.
Right.
It almost seems like these flash drives are a little bit immune to that because they all have slightly different pros and cons, so it seems like all of us own 2 or 3 or all of these devices. I was joking last month, I needed to read my 5.25-inch floppies, and I don't even have a 5.25-inch floppy drive because I have my internal 3.5, and I have a complete stable of flash storage solutions, so I just don't have any need for floppy disks. It's good life. All right, so what's going on with the Beagle Brothers here, Mike?
Well, we actually mentioned a link a few minutes ago to the LCD solution, and that's on oldnewtech.com, which is a new zine that was started by former Beagle brother Warren Ernst. So it's it's a slick looking website. I don't know. He did like 3 updates right around New Year's, so maybe he just had some time off there. Hasn't done much since, but it looks like there's a lot of potential. So cool.
Well, and actually, since you said the word zine, I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention that famous Apple II cracker Cucumba, associate of 4AM, was in a zine called POC or GTFO recently.
Yeah.
And this kind of came out of nowhere for a lot of us, I think. A lot of us didn't realize this magazine was out there. It's PDF, kind of an underground engineering PDF, for lack of a better description. It's sort of, I would liken it to 2600 back in the day, very much like that. It stands for proof of concept, or get the frack out, which is engineering slang. And it's, the zine is amazingly produced. It's filled with articles on hacking microcontrollers and old computers and, payphones and all this kind of stuff. And I love that it's filled with vintage ads. Have you seen the ads in this thing? They're just amazing.
Yeah.
Just, ads for Zork and the TRS-80 and just wonderful old ads spliced in here. And the tone of it has this sort of vaguely steampunk kind of tone in the writing. So just wonderfully produced. So I think they're on issue 14 or something like that now. And the latest issue has quite a detailed column from Cucumba, aka Peter Ferry, on Apple II copy protection schemes. It's a really, really good read. So we'll link to that too.
Yeah, a lot of attention to detail and making it sort of really feel like a retro type magazine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, good job to them for that.
Yeah, the production values are amazing. It must be an incredible amount of work to produce each of those issues. So, Uthernet 2 news. Looks like Marina is finally in the cards, or on the card. See what I did there?
I did. Oh, you're so clever. David Finnegan has announced that his Marina IP stack is now compatible with the Uthernet 2 cards. So if you have one of those, now is the time to go get it.
Excellent. And, I guess Brutal Deluxe is the theme of this show. It looks like. So Antoine Vigneault has the unique distinction of being possibly the only, aside from Jason Scott, archivist of Apple II cassette tapes. And he's got an amazing collection. And looks like he's added a bunch more. Is that right?
Yeah, it's crazy. I had no idea that this amount of software was even available for the Apple II on cassette, but they're now up to 638.
Wow.
638 tapes. And it's not just like slightly different variations of the same software. These are different pieces of software. So kind of crazy.
Wow,
but
I had no idea. I thought there was like 20 or something. Like, it was this weird kind of tail end of the early part of the model line, and nothing serious was ever made on tape. But I had no idea there was that much software.
I tend to think of things like Lemonade Stand and Bob Bishop's early titles and Intro to Your Apple II, that sort of thing. But no, there's quite a bit out there, and with the solutions that you have today, where you can load these audio files onto your iPhone and plug it into the cassette ports on your Apple II and load the software that way.
Yeah, tapes. It's funny. Like, tapes were the worst solution at the time, and they're kind of the best one now, because they're this incredibly low barrier to entry way to get software directly from the internet into your Apple II, or directly from anything into your Apple II. It's funny what a robust technology audio is for that.
Yeah.
Wow, 600 and something. Wow. All right. Well, I'm gonna put my head back together over here, and you talk about Ultimate Micro.
Yeah, so Henry obviously was on last month and talked about some of their future plans, and possibly, he talked about, I think, releasing the Transwarp schematics and files way back when, and nobody did anything with them for a while, but they've now released the RamWorks schematics. So this is a link to a Google Drive page that he's set up, and it's everything that you could want or need to create one of these things on your own, I guess.
Cool. That's great. These schematics are often really useful reference for if you're building something similar, or if you've got something wrong with the machine, something like that. So more information, the better.
Yep. And they've also announced a 4 megabit expansion kit for the RamWorks 3. Hopefully they're hoping to have that ready for KansasFest 2016. So just another reason to show up.
Yeah, definitely. I will be there cash in hand. Well, that about wraps up our news. Why don't we skip ahead to feedback? We got a bit of that backed up, and we should read some selections from it.
Sounds good to me.
Bumper me, Mike.
Here you go.
You've listened to us talk. Now it's time to tell us what you think.
All right, I'm trying out this like fourth wall thing where I call attention to the bumpers.
Right.
It's this new thing. we're iterating to success on the show here, folks.
At least you're not narrating your life like Peter Griffin did in that episode of Family
Guy. Indeed. All right. First piece of feedback I'll grab here is from listener Tom. He says, dear co-hosts numbers 1 through 2 inclusive. Appreciate the attention to detail there. Very mathematically precise. I'm a longtime listener and definitely vote for shows as long as the hosts want to make them. The killjoys can learn about the stop button. We agree. So let's see, he mentions the Accidental Tech podcast has a similar issue with length. And so what they do is they end the show, roll the credits, and then keep talking. Which
Nice.
is kind of a funny solution to the problem. So let's see. He's got some ideas for future shows. He wants, he's got some good suggestions for the Weird Game segment, which has been gathering dust lately, so I won't spoil those. We'll come back to that. And he finishes with To Infinitum. Agreed. Let's see. Next, I've got one from listener Kevin, who has a bit of a problem to throw out to the forum. He says, I'm a huge fan of the Open Apple podcast. Listen to all of them at 2x. Wow, we must sound like squirrels at 2x. I
probably sound like I am actually peppy and energetic at that speed.
That's right. You sound like you're in a good mood at 2x. And you only sort of hate the world.
That's right.
I'm writing to you regarding a problem I have with the 2C Plus I purchased on eBay. So he says it passes all the internal tests and starts up just fine, but the smart port does not appear to work. He says his Unidisc drives, as well as the Nishida Radio and other flash port drives, don't work at all, but Apple 3.5-inch drives work fine. So it seems to be just the smart port aspect that's broken. So apparently he talked to Nishida Radio about it, and he said that his IWM chip must be damaged. And yeah, I don't have a better idea about that one. So if anybody else has one, send us a note at feedback@open-apple.net. You ever heard of a problem like this, Mike?
Nope, that's new to me.
Yeah, I have had some trouble with my 2C Plus with my Unisdisk smart port. In Disk 2 mode, it works great, but in smart port mode, it doesn't tend to work very well. And there's sort of 4 versions of his firmware that are on his site right now, and I found like one version that works with smart port but not Disk 2 and vice versa. So I kind of have to move the firmware version around depending on what I'm doing. So I don't know if that's my 2C Plus that has something fishy with the smart port or if that's an issue with the firmware. So who knows? Maybe this is a common problem. Let's see. Moving on to listener Joe. Oh, this is Joe of Joe's Computer Museum that we talked about last month. And he just wanted to thank us for linking to his museum. And let's see. Oh, and he's made a connection to Henry for some related business. So the Open Apple podcast is bringing the community together one listener at a time. So it's worth calling out Joe's Computer Museum one more time because it's a really great site with some really cool articles and amazing photography, and the layout of the site is really nice. So I've been spending a lot of time there browsing. It's a very pretty website. Let's see, listener Joshua. He says, not that you need ideas for future shows, but some ideas popped into my head that he would love to hear about. One is he suggests an introduction to pieces of hardware. He suggests, for example, the Mockingboard. He would like us to talk about a particular piece of hardware on each show. And yeah, that's an interesting idea. There's a lot of it out there, and not everybody knows what it all is. So maybe we'll just do that. I've got a review that I'm working on for the Apple IIc to VGA device from Plamen in Bulgaria. So maybe we'll talk about that next month. And let's see, number 2, he says, he'd like a comparison to another 8-bit platform, say the Commodore 64. Well, that's going to be a short comparison. The best use for the Commodore 64 is as a stand to hold the Apple II up, see, closer to good using height, you know.
That's pretty much how all those comparisons will go. So just as a spoiler alert.
Yes. Note how well I resisted the Buatari joke. That was so obvious there, and I was like, nope.
Still said Buatari.
I went straight for the Commodore 64. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna give the people a break. I'm gonna give Kevin, one show where he doesn't have to feel the need to retort. So there you go, Boo Commodore. Anyway, he suggests it would be fun to have a sort of a programming comparison and a kind of a technical capability comparison between all the different machines. So that would be great, except I don't know anything about these other machines, which is why it's easy to make fun of them. No, that's not true. But one thing I do for that is, like a lot of us, I'm interested in all these old computers, and so I listen to a lot of other shows. Frankly, I listen to Sprite Castle, and I listen to Antic and Floppy Days, and a lot of these other shows that cover lots of different computers. So I find that really interesting to learn all the stuff that I didn't know about them at the time. What about you, Mike? Do you have interest in non-Apple computers?
No, I don't. I was
To the point. Yeah, all right.
I was given a large collection of Commodore PETs and 64s and other stuff like that a long time ago, and I donated them to a Commodore collector friend of mine. But I have not found much interest in playing with those. And I think a lot of it has to do with, well, what am I going to do with this today? It's not something that really I can use that much. And so my, as with my Apple II and Apple III hobby today, it's a lot of it's nostalgia and learning new things about these old machines that I grew up with. I didn't grow up with a Commodore 64. I boo Atari. I didn't care about that. So there's not a lot of appeal to me for that. So I don't know why any of you are fans of Atari and you should just give it up and come to KansasFest and convert to Apple II fans like the rest of us. Be smart, be fun.
Yeah, I have sort of it's like a forbidden fruit kind of curiosity about, ironically, about these other retro computers, and so I'm sort of interested in them. Not enough to sort of start buying all of them and playing with them because I have enough junk as it is, but. I did actually acquire, like I mentioned last month, I have a bunch of Commodore 64 floppies in a box in my mother's basement next to Carrington's 2GS, and I actually was given that as a gift many years ago by a friend. I expressed a brief interest in exploring the C64, and so he gave me his machine and all his discs. And I'm still waiting for the first one to boot. So, but as soon as it does, I'm sure it'll be fascinating. All right. See that whole setup was so that I could make a joke about because the drives
how slow the drive
really
is.
Slow,
yes.
right? Did you get it? You have to. Man, you're not being a good wingman here, Mike. You're supposed to laugh at my jokes. All right, I'll take it. Okay. Last piece of email I've got is from Charles Mangan, of course, who has been on the show recently for our year-end roundup.
And who you've offended yet again.
Yes, indeed. And in the most unexpected way possible. Little did I know, there are rabid Newton fans out there.
Oh, yes, there are. Mm-hmm.
And I took some cheap shots at the Newton in a recent episode. And he says... I guess be careful what you say about the Newton, even this long after its demise. There's an active, rabid community of Newton users and aficionados. So, that's that's good to know. Oh, the Newton. My strongest memory of the Newton, I used it to take notes. I had one in university, and I used it to take notes in a digital logic class. And I was so dedicated. I was determined to make this thing part of my life. And it has this 60 hertz whining noise that it makes, and I think it's the power saving, like it's cycling the CPU on and off at 60 hertz or something to save battery, and you can hear it, and it stops whenever you start writing because everything turns on to do all of its processing for hand recognition. But whenever you're not writing, it makes this high-pitched 60 hertz whistle that is just maddening. So
I have an even sadder Newton story of my own, and that's that I had an eMate 300.
Oh my, I'm sorry.
Yes, and I was determined to make it work for taking notes in college when I was doing that, and my goodness, what a piece of junk.
You hear that, Charles? Boo Newton. We said it. Boo Newton. There's a portmanteau in there somewhere, all right?
Yes. And he would like to remind us that we are not the only Apple II podcast out there. He's going to rub our noses in it a little bit. So,
yes, that's true.
I suppose that we should go ahead and mention that there is one called How To, like the number, like the letters, the little play on the number 2 there. Funny, haha. And of course, there's Chris Torrance's Assembly Lines video podcast. So, although technically that's a vodcast. So there, Charles.
Is it vodcast? Is that what we're calling them?
I think so, yes.
Is that what the internet has agreed on?
I don't know.
I never could get behind vlog either as for
right.
YouTube
Vlogging,
vlogs.
Yes.
Vlogging, I'm sorry. No internet, no. Bad internet.
But they're both excellent podcasts and you should check them out.
Yes, definitely. We've actually talked about Charles's show, How To, in the past, pretty recently, actually. He's got a really great video on how to install his earphone jack kit that he sells for the 2C Plus. It's great. Really nicely produced videos. All right, well, that's all of the emails I have. Do you have any feedback in your list, Mike?
No, I think that's pretty much all I have for this month.
Okay, well, I think that wraps up the show, unless there's anything else you want to add.
Nope, just thank you again to Peter for coming on and talking about the Gemstone games.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely enjoyed that. It's always nice to hear from the creators. And we'll see you all next month.
Thanks very much, Peter. And bye, everybody.
This has been the Open Apple Podcast. Subscribe to us in iTunes or visit us at open-apple.net, where you can browse our extensive catalogue of past episodes or read our blog. If you like what you've heard today, or even if you didn't, your comments, questions or ideas are always welcome. Send them to feedback@open-apple.net.
Yeah, I think a demon's been detected. All right. That was fun.